And I'll have to say that Paul can be quite difficult. Paul certainly is in favor of the law of Messiah. Paul says that he's willing to go under the law of Moses if he's trying to win Jews. That's a good diplomatic activity. But there it is. Though I am free from all people, I've made myself a slave to all the people he's trying to convert, so that he may win more, may make more converts. Now, notice this carefully. To the Jews, I became as a Jew so that I might convert and win over Jews. To those who are under the law, I became as one who is under the law. Though, note this carefully, I, Paul, are not myself under that law. He's talking about the law of Moses in the letter here. So he's willing to do things of the letter of the law of Moses to work in a friendly way with Jewish people. But Paul himself is not under that law, but he is under the Torah of Messiah. I'm not under the law of Moses in the letter.
So that text in 1 Corinthians 9 is very important because a new teaching is being revealed here. And that is the new teaching of this law of Messiah, which appears, I believe, a few times throughout the
Yes,
letters of Paul.
yes.
Once in Galatians, once
hmm
here, maybe
hmm
Romans, law of Messiah or law of Christ.
hmm
So it's important, the passage, because it clearly shows that Paul was not under the law of works, as he calls it in Romans. So if
Yes.
we go back to the Romans passage where the question is coming from, note here something actually I just noticed,
hmm
perhaps you already had,
hmm
Anthony. Note verse 27. Where there is boasting, it has been excluded by what kind of a law? Of works? So it sounds like Paul saying it's not by the law of Moses.
hmm
No, but by a law of faith. It sounds like what he's saying in 1 Corinthians 9, there's a law of works,
Yes,
a law of Moses, and there's a law of faith, which to me sounds the same as the law of Christ.
absolutely.
For we maintain that a person is justified by faith. See, now
Yes,
we're justified by a different law, a
yes,
law that Paul calls the law of faith, not the
yes,
law of works, as he says there in verse
yes,
28 at the end, apart from works of the law. So, yes, it's a bit tricky because
yes,
Paul is also assuming a lot of things from his audience, mostly Jews, probably,
yes,
also Gentiles. But he's assuming that they're understanding this type of language about
yes,
works and law and
yes.
so on. And then when he says, do we then nullify the law through faith?
No way.
So now he's appealing perhaps to that law of Christ or the
Yes,
law of faith. What do you think?
yes. Oh, no, absolutely right. When he says the law of works, he's not just talking about all laws of being good or bad, not all the law without distinction, but the law of works would be those things that distinguish the Jew from the Gentile: Sabbath keeping, physical circumcision, paying tithes mathematically, and so on. All those things are taken as should be
Right,
taken as understood as the law of works. And he's against that. He's not against law. You've got to
right.
have obedience. So the obedience of faith is Paul's famous phrase in Romans 1, Romans 16.
Yes, those things, those what Paul calls works, they were
Yes.
markers to
Yes.
distinguish
Good
the
point.
chosen Old Testament nation of
Yes.
Israel
Yes.
with the rest of the nations. They were
Yes.
markers. But
Yes,
now
they
in
were.
Christ, Paul
hmm
goes on to say in letters like Colossians, Galatians, he
hmm
goes on to say, and actually he says it here too,
Yep.
that there is one God for Jews and Gentiles.
Yes.
You see
Same
there in
God.
verse 30? Now there's a new thing.
Yes.
Something has happened. And obviously, what happened was that the high priest showed up to introduce the new covenant law
hmm
that the prophet Jeremiah spoke
Yes.
about in Jeremiah chapters 31 to
Yes.
33.
Key here is to see the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And Jesus had said that himself. Jesus said, "Don't imagine I came just to abolish the whole of the law of Moses. I didn't. I came to fulfill it." And sometimes fulfilling it meant a complete change. For example, Jesus said that he'd done away with the food laws. That's in Mark 7. Jesus said, most obviously, you've heard that Moses said something about divorce for certain reasons, but I, Jesus, am telling you no. Moses is now obsolete, gone on that point. There's another instance of doing something for diplomatic reasons, which isn't required. You remember there was an occasion when they were asked whether the disciples, Jesus was asked whether his disciples paid the temple tax. And he said, well, we're children of the kingdom. We don't need to be paying that temple tax. But let's do it to keep them happy. So they then found a coin, you remember, in a fish's mouth, and that was brilliant. So Jesus is bringing the law to its spiritual fulfillment. That must be the answer. Paul then is very strong in the book of Galatians that we understand the difference. By no means should you go back under the letter of the law of Moses. Paul there says it doesn't matter about physical circumcision. He says if you happen to be a circumcised person, don't have an operation to undo that. On the other hand, don't get physically circumcised. And Paul is so strong there. He says, if I were still, this is in Galatians 5, if I were still preaching physical circumcision, why in the world am I being persecuted? That shows that he was not preaching circumcision in the letter, and yet that had been entirely required under the law of Moses. So the difference that people need to learn is between the letter of the law of Moses, which Jesus undermined, contradicted in some places. And Paul did more work on that. It was a gradual process. You must realize that if you're going to challenge the law in any form, this takes a lot of very patient teaching. You can't do it overnight. So starting with Jesus, continuing with Paul, and getting very strong in Galatians, Paul insists on the difference between the letter of the law of Moses and the spirit of the law of Jesus. So we definitely are under a law, but what law? The answer is the law of Messiah.